Today we're going to be working on a dramatic sunset with lots of colors, very vivid painting. If we look at this picture though, we have a little problem that we need to work on. So obviously what we're going to start with is a variegated wash. If you remember from the previous lessons, we're going to start with a variegated wash that goes from blue down to yellows and orange, and then back into yellow towards the bottom. But the problem that we're going to face is if we go from blue to yellow, what will happen is we will turn things into green in the middle, and that we don't want any green in our sky. So the thing that I'd like you to think about is, and I'd like you to do is, we're going to start with a blue in the corner, in the left side corner, and then just add water at the beginning. Add water, and that will reduce the blue almost to no color at all. If we do a graded wash at the top there, and then start adding the yellow and darker yellow and maybe orange and all the way down to a deeper reddish orange. The colors I'm going to be using are cobalt blue, Indian yellow, and you can use New Gamboge or Indian yellow, whatever you have. And if you don't have cobalt blue, you can use ultramarine blue. Then I'm going to introduce cadmium orange, and at the end I'm going to use either a scarlet red or a burnt orange, or you can even use a burnt sienna if you want. So I'm going to use the cobalt blue. I'm going to start with a very weak wash of cobalt blue. Just a hint of blue really is all I want up there. And then we're going to go pick up more yellow and orange and add it below that, right? Just like we said before. So I'm going to start a puddle of Indian yellow down there, mixing a bit of orange into it, cadmium orange, just to get it warm. And we're gonna start the wash from the top. I'm not wetting the paper. I'm starting with the wash itself. So I'm gonna take my blue, pick up a bit more, and here we go. We're gonna put that blue into the corner, and then we're just gonna add water basically to reduce the blue down to an almost no color at all. I'm gonna add a bit more blue so we can see it. But here it is basically. Here's the blue, and then we're gonna get water, and the water is just gonna break it down and reduce it to almost no color at all. That now allows us to take this Indian yellow and bring it in, and we don't risk having that green in our sky. We still want to make sure that we have a bead. We are very interested in that. We want to make sure that we don't have bad transitions, that the transitions are nice and smooth. So make sure that you always have that bead in place when you're doing the wash. So I'm adding more yellow, as you can see, a bit more orange into it. And now I'm going to pick up some benzimida orange or scarlet red if you want, and that's just going to give it that fiery horizon line that is so lovely at sunset. So another go here just to put a bit more color in there, just to get that powerful look of sunset in here. Once I've done that, I can go back into my cadmium orange again and start lightening up that area down into the water. And yes, it's okay to get that flush of red into the water. That just gives us a beautiful transition, as opposed to having a hard edge right there. We don't want a hard edge. Okay, so just going back and touching it up again, and giving it a bit more strength. And now I just need to let it rest. I need it to dry completely, but this is basically where I want my sky to be. Lots of transitions, so we went from blue to graded into white, and we started from yellow into orange, into deep orange, and then back from the deep orange into lighter yellow. So not your everyday variegated wash. Obviously, lots of transitions in there, but that's the fun of watercolors. That's the fun of having different transitions and working with them. We'll let this dry and then come back to it. So now this is dried, and sometimes we're not necessarily satisfied with the amount of color that's in our wash. There's no reason why we can't go, once it's completely dry, bone dry, there's no reason why we can't go back and do another wash over that. And that's what I'm going to do. Now, assume that we like the blue, that we don't want to retouch the blue. It doesn't mean that we start from the middle. We actually have to start from the top with just water if we don't want to add more blue. Adding more water up there on the top allows the remainder of the wash not to look as if it's cut, right? So we don't want to have a sort of a cut starting in the middle of the sky. So by doing this, now we have a transition, and that line looks a bit more soft as opposed to being very hard. And you'll see it'll look very nice when it's completely dry. But there's a nice transition as opposed to being very, very heavy in the sky there. So putting a bit more color, allowing things to work a bit more into stronger color. I'm adding cadmium orange right now to my mix and transitioning. Notice, because I had the bead, there's no form of change between, there's no hard line of change between the Indian yellow and to the orange, right? This one may have a bit of a section here because I'm putting a very strong color at the bead line here, and I want it to actually look a bit different. This is a burnt orange, benzamide, a burnt orange that I'm using. But you can use either burnt sienna or cadmium scarlet or some other warm color, warm orange. And then back into my orange and yellow mix up there, and bringing it down into the water line, into the water in the front. Okay, so this basically is a second wash, and hopefully that'll be dark enough for what we want. We'll let this one dry again, and proceed with our painting. So again, lots of colors, lots of transitions, but I think I think after doing all the practices with your washes, I think you should be able to do something like this and have fun with it. So try it. Let's go with it, and let's let it dry. And as it dries, make sure that you lift the bead at the bottom of the paper, so that it doesn't bloom back into the wash. Just keep removing that bead as it comes down. Okay. So now it's completely dry, and now what I want to do is I want to start using my pencil a bit just to put some marks where I want to do my horizon and my distant hill. So here's my distant hill over there. I'm going to put the second hill here, the one that's a bit closer to us, on this side. So It's got to be a bit lower as well because it's a bit closer. And then we've got the hill that's really close to us, tree lines, and something dramatic happening here. So I'm just gonna pencil it in. I'm not gonna paint. I'm not gonna draw every single tree in there. I'm just putting. These are basically notes for myself to know where I want to put things. Don't draw detailed drawings in a painting like this, because what will happen is you'll end up coloring in as opposed to painting, and that's not a good thing. So let's take a look at the photograph though. And if you look at the photograph, what you'll see is those hills, those three hills, are all the same color. That doesn't make sense. That's not the way that it works. In nature, you're always going to be able to see a variation in value between what is close to you and what is distant from you. So we're going to have to, although the photograph averages these colors out, or this value out, we're going to have to make that distant hill lighter. This one is going to be a bit darker, and of course the last one is going to be much darker than the other. So 3 different values. We're going to have to work on that ourselves. We can't necessarily see it in the photograph. We're going to have to make it happen though. So I'm using a different brush now. I'm using a smaller brush, but I'm using the same colors that I had before. I'm going to use that burnt orange with the cobalt blue. I am going to add a bit of alizarin crimson here, just to get things a bit darker faster. So just those 3 colors basically, and a bit of yellow. And now I'm just taking the same colors that I used and adding water to them so that I can lighten the value in this mix. And I'm going to put in that distant hill with a mix that is lighter in value, has more water in it basically. So here's that distant hill, much lighter than the other one. I'm going to darken the color now, again using cobalt blue and alizarin crimson and some of that orange, the burnt orange that I have, and obviously a touch of yellow as well, so that it would stay on the gray side. And I'm going to do this hill, and I don't want a smooth hill. I want a ruggedy hill a bit, so I want to be able to see some treetops in there. Make sure that when you're doing that you don't have a uniform looking treetop line. So it's not. It shouldn't be. You shouldn't be able to draw a line between the treetops and have a straight line or a straight curve going in one direction or another. So just make sure that we fill this in generously with the color so that we don't get a scratchy feel to the painting here. Make sure that it's almost like a wash in a way, so make sure that you always have a nice amount of color remaining on the paper, so that when you come in with your brush again, it doesn't feel scratchy. So here's that hill. So you can see the different values between the first hill and the back and the second hill, and now what we're going to do is we're going to get seriously dark now, if we can, without getting to the point where the color is sort of too dry and looks chalky. So we want to get it into maybe somewhere between a cream and a milk consistency, lots of color, lots of pigment in this mix, but not so much pigment and lack of water that we can't move things around. I just want to make sure that we never get into that situation. We only use, dry pigment and heavy pigment in very minute cases, but not in big areas like that, because it'll look just very bad. So here it is. Here's the consistency that I'm looking for. It's pretty dark, but it's still wet, and I'm going to go ahead and start on the tip of that landmass. Very dramatic looking in the water like this, especially when you're contrasting it with that beautiful orange. And usually, if you observe Algonquin Park, you'll always see this one tree at the beginning of a landmass, and it's sort of the flamboyant tree. It's the one that stands out from the rest of them, just basically saying, "Hey, I'm the first. I'm the one at the edge of the water here." Usually very dramatic looking. So I like those trees, and I like to portray them nicely and separate them a bit from the rest of the flock. Again, on this hill, be careful that your trees don't look like Christmas trees, that they don't have shapes that are repetitive and mechanical. And also be careful that the tips of your trees and the height of your trees are not in line. So you shouldn't be able to draw a straight line or a straight curve from the first tree, that adventurous tree, all the way to the last tree. They should be going back and forth, some shorter, some taller, and just lots of transitions. And also be careful that the distance between those trees is not repetitive also, so that they don't look like soldiers parading. We want those trees to have the treetops, basically, because that's all we see there, to have unequal distances between them. As we go back and as we go towards the edge of the paper, we want less and less details and less emphasis on what we're seeing. It's always nice to leave some holes in those trees where you can see the light coming through. Just don't leave those holes at the bottom of the trees. Leave those as much as possible in the tops and in the middle ground of the trees, but not at the bottom. You shouldn't be able to see any sky holes at the bottom, because it's just everything becomes thicker towards that edge. So this is our landmass, and so we've put the trees in. I'm just going to fix some areas here. We want to let this dry completely. And again, we have 3 different values in those trees, right? We got the distant hills, the middle ground hills, and the middle ground hill and the front hill, and those are 3 different values. I would say 2 steps between each on a value scale is good. What's left is working on the water, and if we look at the water here, we see those lines. Those are beautiful lines. They're small wavelets, obviously, but beautiful lines that really direct us and move us into the painting. I want you to notice that these lines are not all horizontal. So we'll start with the horizontal lines and the distance, because that's what you can see. But as we move closer and closer, those lines start varying a bit and turning into almost a fan shape. Okay, so watch what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be using essentially the same colors, the same grays or darks that I used for my tree line. I'm just going to make them much, much lighter. So I'm adding a lot of water to them. I'm also going to be adding just a touch of cobalt blue, a touch more of cobalt blue, just to lighten this area, the wavelets a bit more and turn them blue. I don't want to get too blue though. I don't want to get to the point where it's too obvious. But okay, now it's really important that you use the tip of your brush and you reduce the amount of water that's in the brush as well when you're going back there. I do a few test runs like this with my fingers before I let the brush touch the paper, and I want to make sure that I'm using that little finger to control how much the brush is touching the paper. So that becomes sort of a lever that allows me to go up and down. And here I am, I'll put down those lines. And those lines are going to be really close to each other, but I still want to see some of that orange. I don't want to cover it completely. I don't want to make it into a big wash like that. Bring those lines closer. And again, I'm using straight lines, straight across. I'm not forcing waves. I'm creating lines, and those lines are going to become waves. But here's where I start varying my angle a bit. Okay, so my angle goes from a straight flat line and just turns as I move closer, and that allows us to see movement and transition into the painting and transition. As we do that, also make sure that those lines become thicker and thicker as we come closer. So here we are. Make sure that, again, you have control over how much the brush is touching the paper. You can see that angle is starting to happen. And now I'm pushing the brush a bit more into the paper because I'm really getting close. I'm using rough paper for this painting, so it allows me to have a bit of dry brush look much easier, and that's useful also in a situation like this. So you see how the angle is really becoming very dramatic now, and almost definitely not a horizontal anymore. And those lines, as they sort of turn like a fan, they allow us to sort of feel that we're moving into the painting in a very dramatic way. Those waves are exactly what I wanted to see. That's exactly the color that I wanted to see, and the transition. And that area of light on the right is very interesting. So I just want to make sure that I make the area on the left a bit darker, so that there's a transition, there's a variation to the painting down there. Last touches just to make sure that the lines are well done on those land masses. And this simple landscape is done. That's basically it. And I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you don't succeed the first time, try again, I guess, and keep trying it until you have it right.